On February 11th, 2024, at 10:15 in the morning, Earl Braddock sat down across from Roger Keel at First Ag Credit in Bloomington, Illinois, to apply for a $220,000 operating loan for the 2024 crop season. Earl had been banking with First Ag Credit since 2003. He'd taken an operating loan every year for 21 years. He'd paid everyone back in full, on time, by December 31st of the year it was issued. His repayment record was perfect: 21 loans, 21 repayments, 0 late payments, 0 defaults, 0 extensions. Roger Keel had been Earl's loan officer for the last 12 of those years. Roger had approved every application since 2012, without issue. The process was routine. Earl brought his financials in February. Roger reviewed the numbers. The loan was approved within a week, and Earl had operating capital in his account by March 1st. The loan covered seed, fertilizer, herbicide, diesel, crop insurance premiums, and equipment maintenance. The inputs required to plant and grow 1,440 acres of corn and soybeans in central Illinois. This year, Roger said no. Not immediately. First, he spent 40 minutes reviewing Earl's balance sheet. He asked about the payoff on the 8R410. Earl said $112,000 remaining. He asked about the yes 680 combine. Earl said it was paid off. He asked about the farm's appraised value. Earl said he hadn't had it appraised since 2018. Roger said that was the problem. Roger pulled up a report on his computer. He said the 2018 appraisal valued the Braddock farm, the 640 acres Earl owned outright, at $3,200 per acre, for a total land value of $2,048,000. He said that appraisal was 6 years old. He said, First Ag Credit's new lending guidelines, effective January 2024, required a current appraisal for any operating loan exceeding $200,000. He said the bank would need to order a new appraisal before the loan could be processed. Earl said, "How long does that take?" Roger said, 4 to 6 weeks. Earl said, "I need to order seed by March 1st. Roger said, "I understand." The appraisal came back on March 8th. The appraiser was a firm out of Springfield that First Ag Credit had contracted for all Ford County agricultural properties. The appraised value of the Braddock farm was $2,560,000, $4,000 per acre. That was $800 per acre, higher than the 2018 appraisal. Land values had risen steadily across central Illinois since 2020, but the appraisal included a note. The note said that 160 acres on the south end of the Braddock farm, the ground Earl called the home quarter, had been assessed at $2,800 per acre instead of the county average of $4,200. The reason cited was below average soil productivity indicators based on historical yield data. The appraiser had used USDA county yield averages as a baseline and concluded that the home quarter was underperforming. The reduced valuation on the home quarter dropped the total farm appraisal by $224,000. That pushed Earl's debt-to-asset ratio above First Ag Credit's lending threshold. Roger called Earl on March 11th and told him the loan was denied. If this kind of story matters to you, the kind where a number on a spreadsheet doesn't match what a farmer sees when he walks his own ground, we'd be honored if you subscribed. This channel exists because the distance between a bank's valuation of a farm and a farmer's knowledge of his land is where most of the damage happens in agriculture. We tell these stories slow because that's how the truth moves. Word got around. In a county with 847 active farm operations and one agricultural lender, a loan denial doesn't stay quiet for long. Dale Voss heard about it at the Farm Bureau breakfast the following Thursday. He told 3 people at the table that Earl Braddock got turned down for his operating loan. He said, "That south ground of his never was any good. His daddy couldn't make it pay either." Nathan Braddock heard what Dale said. He didn't respond. He finished his eggs and left $7 on the table for the $5.50 breakfast. Virgil Hansen heard about it from the parts counter at Lanning Implement on March 14th. A clerk named Danny mentioned that Earl had been in asking about financing alternatives. Virgil called Earl that night. He asked if everything was all right. Earl said it was. Virgil said, "You need anything, you call." Earl said, "I know." That was the whole conversation. At the co-op, the talk was worse. 3 farmers who had loans with First Ag Credit started checking their own appraisal dates. Keith Oberlin had an appraisal from 2019. Jim Schaefer had one from 2017. Ray Kellner hadn't been appraised since he refinanced in 2014. Each of them ran a quick calculation on what the new guidelines would mean for their debt-to-asset ratios. None of them liked the math. The new appraisal policy at First Ag Credit wasn't just about Earl. It was a policy change that affected every operating loan over $200,000 in the county. Earl was just the first one to find out what happened when a Springfield appraiser who had never walked your ground decided what it was worth. Earl didn't argue on the phone. He asked Roger to email him the appraisal. Roger did. Earl printed it at home, all 34 pages, and sat at the kitchen table that night, reading it line by line. Ruth sat across from him with her laptop, cross-referencing the yield data the appraiser had cited. Here's what they found. The appraiser had used USDA county yield averages from the National Agricultural Statistics Service, NASS data, to estimate the home quarter's productivity. The NASS data showed Ford County's average corn yield in 2023 at 198 bushels per acre. The appraiser had compared that to Earl's reported yields on the home quarter, which averaged 187 bushels per acre over the previous 5 years, and concluded that the ground was underperforming by 11 bushels per acre, or approximately 5.6%. What the appraiser hadn't done, what no one at the appraisal firm or the bank had thought to do, was ask Earl why the home quarter yielded 187 instead of 198. Because if they had asked, Earl would have told them something that would have changed the entire valuation. The home quarter had been in a continuous corn-soybean rotation since Earl's father, Walter, started farming it in 1971. 53 years of the same 2 crops, alternating annually, without a single year of cover crops, without a fallow period, without anything grown on that soil except corn and beans. By 2010, the organic matter content on the home quarter had dropped to 2.8%. For comparison, healthy central Illinois farmland typically runs between 4.5% and 5.5%. At 2.8%, the soil was depleted, It held less water, supported less microbial activity, and produced less nitrogen through natural cycling. The 187 bushel average wasn't because the land was bad. It was because the land was tired. In 2015, Earl started a soil health program on the home quarter. He'd attended a University of Illinois extension workshop in Champaign, led by a soil scientist named Dr. Alan Metzger, who had been studying Illinois soils for 34 years. Metzger's research showed that farms implementing cover crops, reduced tillage, and diverse rotations could rebuild organic matter at a rate of approximately 0.1% per year. Earl enrolled the home quarter in the program. He told Ruth about it that night at the kitchen table. She asked how much it would cost. He said $18 per acre for the rye seed alone, $2,880 a year. She asked how long before they'd see results. He said Metzger estimated 10 to 12 years for full recovery. Ruth didn't say anything for a long time. Then she opened a new column in her farm expense spreadsheet and labeled it Soil Program, Home Quarter. She tracked every dollar from that day forward, every bag of rye seed, every hour of drill time, every soil test fee. By 2024, that column had 147 line items totaling $74,320. She never questioned the expense, not once, in 9 years. For 9 years, from 2015 to 2024, Earl had planted cereal rye as a winter cover crop on the home quarter every fall after harvest. He'd switched from conventional tillage to strip till in 2016, reducing soil disturbance by approximately 70%. He'd added a third crop, winter wheat, to the rotation in 2018. The cost of the cover crop seed alone was $18 per acre per year, $2,880 annually, $25,920 over 9 years. The strip till conversion required a $42,000 implement purchase in 2016. The wheat rotation required $6,400 in additional seed and equipment modifications. Total investment in the soil health program, approximately $74,320, and it was working. Earl had soil tests to prove it. He'd tested the home quarter every 2 years since 2015, using the U of I extension's standardized protocol. The organic matter had risen from 2.8% in 2015 to 3.9% in 2023. That's a 1.1% increase in 8 years, faster than Metzger's predicted rate of 0.1% per year, likely because the home quarter had been so depleted that the recovery curve was steeper in the early years. At 3.9%, the home quarter was still below the county average, but the trajectory was clear. The soil was recovering. The yields were climbing. 187 in 2023, up from 171 in 2015. The water holding capacity had improved. The nitrogen cycling had improved. The aggregate stability, the ability of the soil to resist erosion and compaction, had improved measurably. None of that was in the appraisal. The appraiser hadn't tested the soil. He hadn't visited the farm. He'd used satellite data and NAS averages and county records, all of which told him that 160 acres on the south end of the Braddock farm produced 11 fewer bushels per acre than the county average. What the data didn't tell him was why, or that the why was being fixed, or that the fix had cost $74,320 and 9 years of patience and was actively increasing the value of the land at a rate that no spreadsheet in Bloomington could measure. Earl called Roger Keel on March 12th. He told Roger about the soil health program. He told him about the cover crops, the strip till, the wheat rotation, the organic matter recovery. He told him about the $74,320 he'd invested. He said he had 9 years of soil test data, annual cover crop receipts from the Ford County Co-op totaling $25,920, a $42,000 strip till implement invoice from 2016, and yield monitor records showing a steady improvement trend. He said Roger, the appraiser, never set foot on this farm. He used a satellite and a spreadsheet. He asked if the appraisal could be reviewed. Roger was quiet for a moment. Then he said the appraisal was conducted by a certified firm and the bank couldn't override it. Earl asked if the bank would accept a supplemental soil analysis from a qualified source. Roger said he'd have to check with the credit committee. He called Earl back 2 days later and said the committee would consider a supplemental analysis if it came from a certified soil scientist affiliated with a recognized institution. Earl called Dr. Metzger at the U of I Extension office. Metzger said he'd come out to the farm. He charged $800 for a comprehensive soil analysis, 32 sample points across the home quarter, tested for organic matter, phosphorus, potassium, pH, cation exchange capacity, aggregate stability, and biological activity. He arrived on March 18th with a mud-caked Tahoe and a soil probe and spent 4 hours walking the home quarter, pulling samples every 100 meters in a grid pattern. Earl walked with him. They didn't talk much. Metzger took samples. Earl watched. At one point, about 2 hours in, Metzger stopped at the southwest corner of the home quarter. He crouched down and broke off a piece of soil about the size of a tennis ball. He held it up to the light and squeezed it. It didn't crumble. It held together, not like clay, but like soil with structure. Metzger said, "When did you start the cover crop program?" Earl said, "Fall of 2015. Metzger nodded. He said, "This aggregate structure doesn't happen in less than 7 years. You've been at this a while." Earl said, 9 years. Metzger put the soil chunk in a labeled bag. He said, "I've tested 400 farms in this county over 34 years. Most of them are losing organic matter. Yours is gaining. It's not common." He didn't say it like a compliment. He said it like a fact. He pulled the next sample 100 meters north and kept walking. Ruth drove out to the field at noon with 2 sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. She handed one to Metzger and one to Earl. Metzger ate standing up, looking at the soil surface. He pointed at the rye stubble residue and said, "How much biomass are you getting from the rye before termination?" Earl said, "About 3,200 pounds per acre dry matter." Metzger said, "That's good. Most guys terminate too early and get 1,800. The extra 1,400 pounds is what's feeding the biology." Ruth asked Metzger directly, "Is the appraiser wrong?" Metzger said, "The appraiser used the data he had. The data he had was incomplete." That was the most diplomatic way of saying yes that Earl had ever heard. The results came back on March 28th. Metzger called Earl and read them over the phone. Organic matter, 3.9%, up from 2.8% in 2015. Phosphorus, 38 parts per million, adequate. Potassium, 295 parts per million, good. pH 6.4, ideal for corn. Aggregate stability 74%, significantly above the county average of 58%. Biological activity measured by CO2 respiration 142 parts per million, in the top 15% for Ford County. Metzger said something Earl hadn't expected. He said, "Mr. Braddock, this soil is healthier than 85% of the farmland I've tested in this county. Your yields are behind because the recovery hasn't fully translated to output yet. That typically takes 10 to 12 years. But the foundation is here. In 3 to 4 years, this quarter will be producing 230 bushels, not 187. And the land will hold that productivity for decades because the soil biology is sound." Then Metzger said something else. He said, "Based on these indicators, I would value this ground at $4,800 per acre." Not $2,800, $4,800 per acre. For the ground, the bank had valued at $2,800. That was a $320,000 difference across 160 acres. Metzger put it in writing. He sent his report to Earl, to Roger Keel, and to the credit committee at First Ag Credit. The report was 12 pages, plus 6 pages of lab data, plus a cover letter on U of I extension letterhead that said in formal academic language that the Springfield appraisal firm had undervalued the Braddock home quarter by approximately $320,000 because they had used yield data without soil analysis, which was the equivalent of judging a patient's long-term health by a single blood pressure reading without looking at diet, exercise, or medical history. If you're still here, subscribe. We don't rush these stories because the people in them didn't rush the work. The credit committee met on April 3rd. Roger called Earl on April 4th. The loan was approved. $220,000 at 6.2% for 10 months. Earl had operating capital in his account by April 8th, 38 days late, but in time to order seed for a May planting. Virgil was the first person Earl called after Roger, not to celebrate, to order parts. He needed a new set of row cleaner wheels for the planter. $1,340 for 24 rows, and 3 hydraulic couplers that had been leaking since November. Total parts order, $1,847. Virgil had them ready by April 10th. He didn't charge Earl for the labor on the couplers. Earl said, "Put it on the bill." Virgil said, "There is no bill. You paid me in October." Earl didn't argue. He loaded the parts into the truck and drove home. At the co-op on April 12th, Earl placed his seed order. 1,080 bags of DeKalb DKC 64-35 corn at $312 per bag. $336,960 total, and 720 bags of Asgrow AG 36X 6 soybeans at $68 per bag, $48,960. Fertilizer order, 288 tons of anhydrous ammonia at $580 per ton, $167,040. Herbicide, $41,200 for a pre-emerge and post-emerge program across 1,440 acres. Crop insurance premiums, $62,400 for revenue protection at the 85% coverage level. Diesel for spring field work, approximately $18,000. Every one of those line items came out of the $220,000 operating loan that the bank almost didn't approve because a man in Springfield looked at a satellite image instead of walking the dirt. Earl never said anything publicly about the appraisal dispute. He didn't complain about the bank. He didn't criticize the appraiser. He went to the co-op, bought his seed, applied his fertilizer, and planted 1,440 acres of corn and soybeans on schedule. The home quarter went in on May 14th. Cereal rye terminated 2 weeks prior. Strip-tilled, planted to corn at 34,000 seeds per acre. In October, the home quarter yielded 211 bushels per acre, 24 bushels above the previous 5-year average, 13 bushels above the county average, the highest yield that ground had produced since Earl's father planted it in 1971. Ruth printed the yield monitor report and put it in the filing cabinet in a folder labeled Home Quarter, Soil Program. She didn't say anything. She just filed it. Nathan came by that evening. He'd been running the combine on the north sections all week. 480 acres of beans averaging 58 bushels, which was good. He asked how the home quarter did. Earl handed him the yield monitor printout. Nathan looked at it for a long time. He said, 211. Earl said, 211. Nathan said, Grandpa would have lost his mind. Earl said, he's the one who told me to take care of the dirt. Nathan set the printout on the table and said, you want to tell Roger Keel, or should I? Earl said, nobody's telling anybody anything. The soil test already told them everything they need to know. 3 other farmers in the county called Earl that fall asking about his cover crop program. Keith Oberlin called on October 28th. He asked what rye variety Earl planted and what seeding rate he used. Earl said cereal rye, VNS, variety not stated, at 56 pounds per acre, drilled with a Great Plains 1510 no-till drill immediately after harvest. The seed cost $18 per acre. Keith said, that's it. Earl said, that's it. The hard part isn't the money, it's planting it for 9 years before you see the payoff. Keith ordered rye seed that week. Jim Schaefer called the following Monday. He asked the same questions. Earl gave the same answers. Ray Kellner didn't call. He just showed up at the co-op on November 4th and ordered 12,000 pounds of cereal rye seed, without telling anyone why. Earl paid back the $220,000 loan on November 22, 2024, with a single check. Roger Keel processed the payoff without comment. That was the 22nd consecutive operating loan Earl had taken and repaid in full, on time, before December 31st. Roger didn't mention the appraisal. He didn't mention the soil test. He didn't mention the 38-day delay that had forced Earl to scramble his planting schedule. He just processed the check. Dr. Metzger published a case study on the Braddock home quarter in the Illinois Soil and Water Conservation District newsletter in January 2025. The study cited it as one of the most successful soil health recovery programs in Ford County. It included the organic matter data, the yield trajectory, and the economic analysis showing that Earl's $74,320 investment had increased the land's productive value by approximately $320,000 and its market value by a proportional amount. The article didn't mention First Ag Credit. It didn't mention the loan denial. It simply presented the data and let the numbers speak. Roger Keel probably read it. He subscribes to the newsletter. It's on the reading rack in the First Ag Credit lobby. But he never mentioned it to Earl, and Earl never brought it up. And that's how it works in farming. The man who knows the dirt doesn't argue with the man who reads the spreadsheet. He just goes home, plants the cover crop, and waits for the soil to prove him right. It takes longer that way, but the proof lasts. The home quarter is scheduled for another soil test in 2025. Earl expects the organic matter will hit 4.2%. Metzger expects 4.3%. Either number would put it above the county average for the first time in the Braddock family's history on that ground. 54 years of depletion, followed by 10 years of rebuilding, followed by a number on a soil test that says the land is coming back. Earl's father Walter once said that the most important crop a farmer grows is the one nobody sees, the soil itself. Walter said that to Earl in 1998, standing at the fence line of the home quarter, looking at ground that was producing 165 bushels and slowly getting worse. Earl didn't understand it then. He does now. And every fall when he drills cereal rye into the stubble at $18 an acre, he's planting the crop his father was talking about. The one that takes a decade to harvest. The one the bank can't see on a spreadsheet. The one that the soil test finally proved was worth more than anyone in a Bloomington office had believed.